So I mentioned before, my name is Rachel Gustafson. I am a certified financial planner with Financial Investment Team. We're a woman-owned and run firm. We specialize in really holistic financial planning. I was a teacher for many years, so I'm really passionate about the financial education piece. I really love collaborating with other professionals to get important information out to the community. So really excited to be here talking about something that touches all of us at some point in our lives. We go through a transition. And so today is about you ladies, but it's also about us sharing with you some of the things that we help our clients work through when you're going through transitions. So we're going to start off with some introductions, a little bit about me, just as I did, and I'm going to hand it off to Ellen to share a little bit about her, and then Janet will share about herself, and we'll go from there. Ellen?
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you all for being here today. I'm Ellen Severson. I'm an attorney and I own my own practice at Severson Law, located in Beaverton, Oregon. And my primary focus is estate planning and estate administration. So the estate planning side, of course, is drafting the documents that you put in place to name decision makers and leave instructions. And the estate administration side is when someone passes away, I can help the family with whatever situation they have, navigate the process to make sure it's smooth and efficient, and they can receive their inheritance and move on with their lives. A few things that set me apart from maybe some other estate planners is I really start by education first, and I listen to my clients so that I can understand exactly what are your hopes, fears, goals, and make sure that we come up with a plan that sits right with you. I draft in plain English. It's always my goal that my clients can read the documents and understand them without my help. So that standalone, they just understand how these documents work. And I communicate regularly through the process so that you always know what are the next steps and what's coming up. And I would like to hand the floor over to Janet to let her talk about herself. Janet.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you, guys. So happy to be here. My name is Janet Rucker-Smith. I'm a certified professional coach, and I call myself an evolutionary life coach. I am also a founder and owner of my own coaching business called Work, Love, and Life Evolutions. I'm also a part of the ICF Oregon, ICF meaning an International Coaching Federation, which is the overarching global governing body of coaches. And Oregon has a chapter, and I'm a part of their board. I also participate in pro bono, the ICF pro bono initiatives, and then there's some other stuff about my education that you can see. What I've realized is that I've been a coach basically my whole life. It's just kind of this innate skills. I know you ladies here, Rachel and Ellen, you could probably say the same thing whenever we're working with people. We just have their best interest at heart and want to help them be the best they can be. So ultimately, I work with people who are looking forward to moving to a better place in their life and want help getting there. It's really that simple. So actually, I'm going to transition into kind of like the introduction to the webinar. So before we get started into the meat of the webinar today, it's important to make sure that we're all on the same page as to what transition means in the context of what we are here to talk about today. So what's the difference between change and transition? It's not uncommon for people to use the terms change and transition interchangeably, but there is a difference. Change is something that happens to us even if we don't agree with it, like divorce, relocation, and job change. Transition, on the other hand, is internal. It's what happens in our minds as we go through change. Transition is the internal psychological process of adapting to a new situation. So in other words, change is situational, transition is psychological, and perhaps even psychospiritual. Change can happen very quickly, while transition usually occurs more slowly. Like the birth of a baby, that transitions a marriage into something new and very different, or like the sudden layoff that catapults us into career transition. So what we have for you now is a poll question. And here are some common transitions that most of us go through at some point in our lives. Let us know which transition or transitions you are currently going through or have most recently gone through, and you can check all that apply.
I'm going to bring it to a close. Give you a couple more seconds if you haven't voted already. And Janet, can you see the results?
Yes, I can. Great. Okay, well, that's wow, that's pretty, that's a lot in that middle section. You know, it's important to remember that life transitions happen to all of us, every single human being. For example, this global pandemic we've all been in for over a year now has created sudden challenges for many. For some people, their work has continued through the pandemic, and their social lives may even have continued more or less as before. However, others have lost their job, lost their homes, had to choose between employment and taking care of their children who couldn't attend school in person. Many people around the world simply don't know how they will get back on their feet. And people react to change and transition very differently, some with great excitement for something new, and others with great dread because they prefer the status quo. So let's get into how we can mentally and emotionally better navigate life's transitions. All righty. So we start with acknowledging what is. It may sound simple, but acknowledging that something is ending is truly the first step in this internal transition process. Transitions may even bring about a profound realization that we actually have very little control over so many aspects of our life. For most of us, it's really hard to accept that we're not in control of what's happening. But there's great peace and power in relinquishing control and allowing life to unfold as it does, because it will anyway. Life transitions are challenging because they force us to let go of the familiar and face the future, feeling insecure and vulnerable. And by simply acknowledging what is happening, we honor the changes and the transition. And being in between can definitely be an anxiety-ridden place to be. You're not where you were, but you're also not yet where you want to be. I see this in between as a space of deep inner growth filled with opportunities to challenge our status quo. Next, allow feelings to flow. Find ways to be still, to not be doing anything. I know it's often very challenging to simply sit and notice our feelings. Fear, anger, sadness, anxiety, loneliness, and fatigue are common internal experiences that can be hard to handle. To be uncomfortable in this space is completely normal. So instead of trying to push the inevitable feelings away, try to embrace them all. Talk it through with a trusted friend or family member, and if needed, a healthcare professional. And we all know that during these trying times of transition, it's so easy to self-medicate and numb ourselves with whatever our drug of choice is: excess alcohol, excess shopping, eating, TV binge watching. We also know that all these methods to feel better are only very temporary. And in order for our feelings to flow out of us, we must first experience them, feel them. And there is no shortcut to this part of the transition process. And done in a healthy way, we all have the ability to experience a powerful and positive life transformation in the midst of transitions, no matter who we are or where we're from. And next, inquire within. What does that mean? Well, transitions are a perfect time to take note of what has been lost and gained during the closing life chapter. Ask yourself, what benefits do I have? What beliefs, rather, do I have around this transition? Am I blaming myself for something I had no control over? And am I telling myself what I should or should not have done? Pay attention to thoughts of self-judgment, self-criticism, and failure. Most of us will give our friends and family in similar situations loads of compassion, but we too often won't give that same beautiful compassion to ourselves. Redefine priorities. Transitions in life allow us to reconsider where our priorities currently are. This pandemic experience has most definitely caused many people to rethink their entire life by asking questions like, how do I really want to spend this time here on Earth? What's really important to me? How often am I pleasing others at the expense of my own needs and pleasures? And where do I see myself wasting my time and energy? Our goals and values often change throughout our life. What was once a priority when we were younger may no longer be important, or perhaps not important at all. Now, with the next slide, let's pivot to how we can positively move forward through transitions. Reframing the situation. This is where our power is and what we can choose. The most resilient people see change as an opportunity rather than a monster to fear. So how do we do this? One very effective way involves shifting our perspective, which is one of the very few things in life we can control. And how we navigate transitions is absolutely a matter of perspective, whether we choose to judge it as positive or negative, all depending upon how we choose to think. Also, when coping with major transitions, our brain needs time to adjust. No matter the life event we're going through, our brain doesn't like the element of uncertainty. So, as a primal safety response, it defaults to a negative bias. And studies show that the vast majority of times when people predict bad things are going to happen, they are wrong. So, to help soothe the brain when its stress responses are firing, try to remember that uncertainty simply means we don't know the future. It does not mean that the future is bad, just different. And as we continue to move forward in the transition process, it's time to reclaim our personal responsibility and our power. Personal responsibility begins and ends with acceptance, a deeper level of the acknowledgement of what is actually happening. Not our opinion or judgment of it. You don't have to even like what is happening. At the beginning of a major transition, it's completely understandable to express blame and harsh judgment toward people, companies, the universe, forces outside ourselves that we believe forced us into an unwanted major life transition. It's also very important to be very careful not to stay in that unhealthy space. It's all too easy to fall into victim thinking, where we lose our power to make wise, life-affirming choices and decisions. Some ways to reclaim personal responsibility and power are to ask yourself, what is the smallest step I can take right now? Look at the lessons learned from the closing of the current chapter and even past chapters, and begin to explore new possibilities of a new life chapter. Change requires courage. The willingness to pause and be mindful helps you develop your own wisdom and, in turn, your own inner power. And finally, give yourself time. Integrating yourself into your new life situation takes time. So remember to be patient with yourself. Keep reminding yourself that the inner growth process is a marathon, not a sprint. And it's not linear either. Human beings are far too complex to go through a profound psychological process like a major transition in an easy, orderly, linear way. Above all, don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it. We can't avoid change, but we can live a life of resilience. We can embrace transition and see challenges as opportunities to thrive. And when we're at that place where we can finally see opportunities to thrive, we begin to truly let go and move forward. So, thank you. And off to you, Rachel.
Thank you, Janet. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
So Janet touched a little bit on the emotional side. I'm going to touch a little bit on the financial side. So the reality is we all have unknown and known types of transitions that affect our lives. And she mentioned some of these life transitions: divorce, children, starting a new career, college, retirement. These are life changes that can be planned for, but they can also sneak up on you. So what can you do to prepare your finances when you're going through or preparing for a life transition? So the first is your budget. You see a picture of it here. I'm going to pop up a question before I dig into the why behind it on those of you who follow a household budget. So you're going to see a poll pop up for you. Yes, no, I have tried. So go ahead and take a moment to answer. And these are anonymous, just so you know. Okay, there we go. Share the results here. So half of us follow a budget. That's wonderful. 33% no, and 17% I have tried. This is actually pretty impressive because most people that I work with or started working with have tried following a budget, but have given up. So it's good that you're following a budget, and if you haven't, it's not too late. But the first thing that you want to do when you're going through a transition or preparing for a transition is you've got to revisit your budget. How is this transition going to affect your finances now and later? So in other words, how much is your transition going to cost? There is always a financial impact. Transitions cost money, almost all of them. So when I say revisit your budget, I'm not trying to tell you how you should be spending your money or where it's going. My goal is for you to see financial patterns. So where is your money going, and how is this transition going to change those patterns? So revisit the budget. Second, and one of the most important things to keep in mind during a transition that Janet alluded to earlier is time. And so that is the reason for the second picture, clock. Don't feel pressured to make big decisions during a transition. So let me tell you a story about one of my clients who lost her husband. It was a tragic accident, unexpected. She was overwhelmed with grief. And then she had, on top of that grief, all of the financial decisions that she needed to make. To make things worse, she had friends and family sharing their 2 cents on what she needed to do. And the reality was, most of the things that were on her list, she could wait for. She came to me thinking I was going to have this big list of things that she needed to do. And yes, I had a few things that she needed to do, but most of them could take time. When you're going through a really emotional transition, like the death of a family member, you really do need to take some time. It takes a lot of time to grieve and to get through, and don't feel like you need to make these big decisions, even when you have family members who are telling you that you do. So take time. That is okay. And finally, I mentioned that there are some things that you do need to do. One of them is beneficiaries. So you need to revisit accounts like financial accounts, retirement accounts, investment accounts, and make sure that the beneficiaries are still up to date. So for example, if you have a child, your child should be listed as a contingent. If you get married, most people will change their primary beneficiary to their spouse, not their parents. It's the most common one that I see. And then divorce. So I'm going to tell you another story about another client who her ex-husband actually forgot to take her off of his 401k account. So when he passed away, she received all of his 401k assets. So while it ended up okay for her and actually in her benefit, this can really hurt family members if it's something that you forget to check on and revisit, especially if you have multiple accounts. It's one of those things that can be tedious, but we really don't know what's going to happen in life. So revisit beneficiaries, and it's really extremely important. I'm sure that Ellen will allude to that as well. Some common questions that I get asked are, how do I prepare my finances? This comes back to your budget, okay? Revisiting your budget, making sure you have an emergency savings that's sufficient, and just making sure that your finances are prepared for that transition. If you're going through one that was unexpected, the biggest thing that you can do is, again, look at your budget, and maybe there are places that you can cut back from to make up for this additional expense that may have come up. Another question that I get asked is it okay to pull back from retirement savings when I need the money? So this really depends on your situation. Most of the time I say try not to stop contributing to retirement, but yes, there are going to be times that you may need to do that. And the biggest piece that I tell clients is, if you do this, if you pull back from retirement savings because you're going through a transition and you just need every penny, you need to put it on your calendar at some point in the future to bump those contributions back up, because we are busy, life gets in the way, and you're going to forget to do it. So if it's a transition that's a period of time, like maybe you're having a child and you need 1 year, then 1 year in the future, put it on your calendar to make sure that you're bumping those contributions back up so that you don't forget. So these are my 3 little pieces of advice that I share with all of my clients. So hopefully they've been helpful to you. I'm going to turn it over to Ellen so that she can share a little bit about some estate planning things to think about. Ellen?
Thank you so much, Rachel. Both Janet and Rachel, these are such good things to think about when these big changes come up. And I'm going to take it just another step further on the financial side, which the estate plan really holds hands with the financial plan. I'm going to start with an overview, just kind of a broad overview of, well, what is an estate plan, and a few pieces that go along with that, and then follow up with some considerations when there are transitions that come up. So in the most basic terms, an estate plan is really 2 pieces to it. You are giving someone legal authority to advocate on your behalf in several different capacities, and you're leaving instructions. What should they do? What are your wishes? So the 2 parts to every estate plan is planning for incapacity. So if you got in a car wreck, or if you're ill and you're not able to communicate with your doctors, who's talking to the doctors, who has access to the bank accounts to pay mortgage and pay bills. And the second part is what happens after you pass away. Who do you want to take care of, and how do you want to take care of them? There are probably 3 basic types of estate plans. There's a do nothing plan, there is a will, and there's a trust. I thought this might be a fun time to have a poll question to see who here has an estate plan.
I'll give it a couple more seconds. Okay, I'll share the results.
Okay, this is actually pretty interesting because the statistics for the entire United States is exactly this. 60% of Americans do not have any estate plans. They choose the do nothing plan. So we are very, very on par with the general statistics. The do nothing plan, so this is by far the most popular plan. It is the easiest to set up. You just do nothing. But what people don't realize is that by doing nothing, you are by default choosing the default laws in the state that you reside in. So Oregon has an estate plan for you. And a good place to start is just to have a conversation and with an estate planner and see, well, what does that mean? Who receives my estate? What happens? You know, without an estate plan, you will require a court process when you pass away, and Oregon assumes your family should receive your assets, and maybe that's exactly what you want, but it's more costly because you have to have insurance above and beyond a regular probate with a will. And you also, if you've got minor children, and they would each need a conservatorship for their funds, minors can't receive inheritance, so it can end up being the most costly plan to administer. When you start putting pen to paper and actually coming up with a plan, the non-negotiables, whether or not you have a will or a trust, is going to be an advance directive and a power of attorney. And these 2 documents handle what would happen for incapacity. So with your advance directive, you're going to name someone who gets to talk to your doctors and advocate for your care when you're not able to. And you can leave instructions about what are your end of life considerations, what are your wishes regarding that. And let me tell you, that's not a decision that you want to put off on a family member. It's really hard to make, but it's exponentially harder when you're trying to make that decision for somebody else. And then with the power of attorney for finances, that's the document where someone has immediate authority to talk to your financial advisor, access bank accounts, and make sure that your medical bills and house bills, that your financial life is being taken care of when you're not able to. So then when we think about what happens when you pass away and how to leave instructions, there's two main documents that come into play. There's a will and there's a trust. And the most basic difference between these two documents is with a will, it still will go through a court process. It's called the probate. But you get to determine who's going to be the executor, who's making the decisions and running the estate. And you can determine, well, who receives what. So if you've got, and how do they receive it? You know, if you've got minor children, you get to name guardians, who's going to raise those kids. You can name and set up a trust so that the funds are managed until an age that you think is appropriate for those kids to receive funds, and you avoid the conservatorship. And then you can also hold those funds until they're a little bit older. With a conservatorship at 18, ready or not, they get all of their inheritance. So with a trust set up for those minors, you can determine, is 25 an appropriate age? Do you want to hold it till they're 30? Are there some kids you maybe want to keep it in trust for life, depending on how savvy they might be or unsavvy they might be with their finances? So the point is, you can leave whatever instructions make sense to take care of your family in the way that you want them to be taken care of. So with the trust, that's the main way that you're going to be able to avoid the court process. The goal with a trust is that on your death, that trust will own everything. It owns your house, it owns every account that you have, it owns all of your assets, so that your successor trustee, when they step in to manage that trust, they have legal authority to manage the trust assets. And so that's how you stay out of the court process. And as soon as debts and taxes are settled, your trustee can distribute those funds. So it can be quite a bit faster and quite a bit more cost effective than a probate. Just for comparison, the probates are usually no less than 6 months, and they cost about $5,000 or $6,000. Trust administrations, I've seen them as fast as a few months, and there's a few administrative costs to it, but it's maybe $1,500 instead of the $6,000. So do you want to spend more now with the trust to save money and time down the road, or do you save some money now by setting up the will for it to be a little bit longer and more costly down the road? And of course, with both documents, you've got several benefits of, setting up the minors trust for minors. If you've got any beneficiaries that have government benefits, you can set up a supplemental needs trust so you don't disrupt their benefits. If you've got a blended family, you can do more sophisticated planning to make sure your children are not disinherited. And once you become a taxable estate in Oregon, if you've got more than $1 million, there's some other tax savings functions that we can do once you start planning. So now with this next slide, let's focus on some of those big transitions that come up and what documents might come into play with each of these situations. And Rachel, if you can just switch to the next slide. Thank you. So when you're 18, people always ask me, well, when do you need an estate plan? When is it appropriate? And I think everybody does need an estate plan of some form. So a lot of parents don't realize when your child turns 18, you no longer have legal authority over that child. You no longer have a right to talk to their doctors. So at the very least, I would say, make sure there's an advance directive, the very, very least. And bonus would be to have a power of attorney with that when you have a child that goes off to college, so that you've got somebody in place just in case something comes up. You've got someone who can help navigate and manage their care for them. Of course, when you get married, it's good to add your spouse. Make sure your spouse is the decision maker. Update your documents so that the two of you can take care of each other. The first non-negotiable in my mind is when you've got children, you really need to have, at the very, very least, have a will, name a guardian, and set up a minors trust. A lot of times people think, well, my family will take care of it. They're going to step in. I know my kids will be okay. But when you think about it, if your family has a disagreement about, well, who should raise these children? You've got both parents are gone. So the husband side of the family thinks they're most appropriate. The wife side thinks they're more appropriate. It can lead to more contention and conflict in an already stressful situation. So making it clear who you want to raise your children really takes a lot of stress off and really can help streamline the process. Of course, if you were to get divorced, make sure that you pull your spouse off of all your documents. There's a few statutory provisions that'll pull, limit an ex-spouse's authority, but not on the healthcare directive. You don't want your ex-spouse having the last call on whether to pull the plug or not. You want to make sure that you, like Rachel is saying, that you update those beneficiary designations. I too, in a couple of situations, have seen an ex-spouse receive a retirement account. So it's a good time to, again, pause and just look through your entire life and make sure that things are updated so that you can not leave an inheritance to your ex-spouse or leave decisions up to them. If you remarry, that's a good time to think. If you've got kids from a prior marriage, this can be a really important conversation to figure out how do you want to take care of your new spouse and how do you want to make sure that your children are not accidentally disinherited if you were to pass away first. And of course, around retirement age, about this time, you've probably got a pretty big net worth to your estate. Maybe you've got a lot of tax savings functions that might make sense, or maybe you need to update your documents because your minor children are now grown and they've got their own children, and you want to reflect that and take care of maybe the grandkids in a different way. If you're moving into an assisted living facility, it's a great time to make sure that every designation is updated. I have seen countless times where someone has named just their spouse as their agent and as their healthcare representative, and their spouse has passed away years ago. And so making sure that you update that so you have someone who's alive, able, and willing in each of these roles will help avoid someone needing to get a guardianship or conservatorship to take care of you as you age. And then of course, when death occurs, that's a different matter from the estate planning side of it, but that's when you need to just talk to somebody to see what are the next steps that you need to take to navigate that process. So in these big changes, there's really several steps to consider to just streamline the process when you're faced with a change. And just a reminder too, it doesn't have to be a huge change. It could be, maybe a relationship has changed. Maybe you're not speaking to the named guardian anymore, or maybe your healthcare representative has moved to Florida or moved out of the country. Maybe it doesn't make sense to have that person in that role anymore. So anytime any change comes up, you first want to recognize that a change or transition has occurred, which gives you then the time to reflect on what does that change mean for you, and go through those steps that Janet had talked about, kind of process it, go through the time, take the time, like Rachel said, to really process this change, sit with it. And then, step 3 would be to review your estate plan once you've kind of processed what this change means. Look through your estate plan and see what changes what changes come from the changes in your life with that estate plan. And this also includes the do nothing plan, which leads to step 4, which is it's a good idea to reach out to an estate planner and talk about this change. Be educated, know what it means. If you don't have an estate planning document in place and a big change happens, now what do the default laws say? If you do have an estate plan and this big change happens, well, how do I update that estate plan? Can I do it by an amendment? Do I need to do a complete restatement of the trust? What happens to make sure that your wishes at this time are going to be honored and reflected? And then of course, step 5 is take action and take the steps that you need to update that plan so that you know that your wishes are going to be honored and you'll be taken care of in the way that you want to be. So it's just the takeaway is that estate plans, they're a living document. What I mean by that is they need to live, grow, evolve with you as your life changes and you evolve and grow over time. It's each time it's planned, it's a snapshot of your life right now with the best that we can do as far as contingencies we can think about. But it's only so good as this phase of your life right now. So when those changes come up, just take the time to talk through it and educate yourself on where you're at and where do you want to go and what are the steps to get there. Just as a takeaway, I don't charge for initial consults because I think education is so important. I think it's really the most important thing is to just be educated and just know. And even if you don't have an estate plan, know what that means and make sure you're comfortable with it. Please don't hesitate to reach out and call or email me anytime you've got questions. And thank you all for being here. I'm gonna go ahead and turn the floor back over to Rachel and open it up for Q&A.
Yep, we're gonna move into Q&A. So we are here for you. You've got 3 specialists here on the panel. So if there are things that are touching your lives or questions that you have, please ask them. We are going to unmute you all so that you can unmute yourselves and ask your questions, or you can type them into the questions bar. So we'll give you a minute to go ahead and ask any questions. I'm going to turn off my slide here.
Rachel, I have some questions that came through while you guys were speaking, and
Yeah,
I'm just going to, this is Carrie, I'm just going to ask them for those that typed their questions in. I'm going to ask them now, and you can continue to type, and I'll ask them when we're wrapped up here. Everybody should be unmuted, so feel free to also just unmute yourself and ask a question if you'd like. So the first question that I have is, my husband and I are going to be, can you hear me okay, Rachel?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. My husband and I are going to be separating and possibly divorcing. What should I be doing to prepare my finances?
Great question, and that is a big transition to be going through. Whenever I have clients who are going through divorce or potentially divorce, I always say, find an experienced divorce lawyer. If you're not quite at divorce and you're separating, hoping to get back together, there are some things that you can do just to prepare yourself. Not going to be a surprise that I'm going to say revisit your budget, but prepare yourself. If you're separating and you were living on 2 incomes and now you're going to 1, you need to prepare for that. If your significant other was the person that was running the finances, this might be a learning point for you. So also a really good time to find a financial planner that can kind of walk you through these things. But the first big place that I would go is to go through a budget spreadsheet. I have one I can email if you're interested, just let me know. But go through the budget worksheet and find out, what are my expenses now? Are any going to change once we do separate? So that's the first place. I would also recommend developing a list of your assets and your debts so that you know everything that is owned between the 2 of you and have a conversation, if it's amicable, about how things are going to get split. But if it moves to divorce, you are going to have to declare all assets and debts anyway. So it's a good place to start, is to just take an inventory of household inventory, cars, retirement accounts, mutual funds, brokerage accounts, all of that. Credit cards, that's another big one too. And then, just if there are kids involved, you want to consider what the child custody is going to look like. Have a conversation again if it's amicable. That's an important place to be having a conversation about. But really revisit budget, have an assets list, assets and debts list, and prepare yourself for that change in that way. And probably also a good time to relook at beneficiaries potentially too, depending on what's happening. I know you asked about finances, but I'm going to pass it off to Janet. Janet, is there anything that you would recommend someone who's going through this type of a big transition to prepare for?
You brought up a great point, Rachel. So much of it does depend from my standpoint on whether it's amicable or whether it's not, because those, the difference in the psychological part of this transition is major. That would be a huge difference. Either way, it's still a transition, and a transition is of that type. Your marriage, you're separating, potentially divorce. That's significant, no matter whether it's expected, amicable, or not. So, like I always say, first and foremost, just sit with that and acknowledge what's happening. Also, to your point, Rachel, there's a certain, with finances, I mean, you can sit with your with your emotions and try to process all of this, and you will process all of this, but some things need attention right away, and things like the financial aspect, we really need to address that as quickly as possible. So I would say support. You are going through an emotional transition. I mean, the transition is affecting you deeply emotionally, but if you can find like a family member, a trusted friend, somebody who can be there with you to be strong in that that technical aspect with the money, so that you can be doing both simultaneously, at least for the beginning of it.
Great points. Ellen, is there anything you would add for estate planning?
Yeah, just a couple considerations. And again, if you're to the point where you're working with a family law attorney on that, just know that there is a movement towards collaborative law. And there's an organization in Oregon who has a whole cluster of family law attorneys that focus on collaborative law, where they work with therapists, they work with support teams, and they try to mediate in a way that every single member, including the kids, has somebody who's advocating for them to try to keep you out of the court process, which will save you so much time and so much stress if it's possible to handle it amicably. So that's just my side note on that. And then of course for the estate planning, it's tricky because there's some people want to make sure that the power of attorney advance directive are changed immediately, even if it's just a separation, to make sure that this person no longer has that sort of power over you if something happens for your health. So that could be something where maybe you take it in two parts and update the power of attorney advance directive immediately. And then you've got to wait till the end of the separation of the divorce to update the estate plan, because oftentimes in the divorce decree, there's going to be certain pieces of it that tie into the estate plan. Maybe one of the spouses needs to keep a life insurance policy for the benefit of the kids, or maybe part of the estate is going to be split because of that divorce decree. So it's a little premature prior to that date to update the will or the trust, but do it as soon after as you can so that you can make sure you give your estate planner a copy of the divorce decree. They're going to work with your financial planner to make sure all of those beneficiary designations are updated on that. And just redo the estate plan at that time. Once you have all the information, you know kind of where all the cards fall. And always reach out for help when you can, because it really helps the whole process for everybody. I'll hand it back to Rachel. Yeah, thanks.
Good point. Carrie, do we have any other questions?
We do. The next question is, do you need a trust without minor children?
I'm going to go ahead and take that one.
I can't answer that.
There's so many considerations that come in with trusts. And so there's several different types of trusts. So there's setting up a trust now while you're alive is a revocable trust that has the benefit of, if incapacity happens, if you're incapacitated, your trustee can manage your finances. If you need any tax planning, because if you're married and you've got over $1 million, you can do quite a bit of tax savings. Anytime you want to avoid probate, you can set up that trust. With regard to minor kids, that would be a trust that's called a testamentary trust. And what I mean by that is it's a trust that doesn't exist until something happens, until you pass away. Because obviously, if you're alive, you're going to be taking care of your kids, you're managing their finances, and life moves on. So that testamentary trust for your minor kids, that can be tucked into a will, that can be tucked into your revocable living trust. So that function, so I don't know if that answered your question or not, but it comes into play where you can put that into either a will or trust to make sure that your minor children are taken care of. But if you don't have minor kids, or your kids are grown, there still could be a lot of reasons why a trust or a revocable living trust might make sense for you. And I'd like to see if anybody else wants to share or chime in on that. So see if Janet or Rachel.
I think you got it. I don't know.
Yeah,
We do have a couple other questions. I am planning to start a family in the next year. What should I be thinking about now?
Great question. I'll hit the finances and then I'll pass it off to Ellen and Janet. Going back to your budget, you want to build if you haven't, or revisit your budget. And so some things that you're going to start adding in are things like diapers and creams, and is your kiddo going to go to childcare, extra food? How is it going to change your household expenses? If you're in the boat of you're preparing, that's fantastic, and you can revisit the budget and make those changes before and make sure you're prepared. If it's something where you're going through it now and you need to make some changes, you still need to revisit the budget, but some things that you'll be looking for are where are places that we can cut back to make room in the budget. The other big thing that you want to think about is health insurance and anticipating costs. So check with your health insurance coverage to see what is my out-of-pocket going to cost me to have this kiddo. Do I have an HSA that I can put funds into? Are there funds in there that I can use? And having a good understanding around what your costs health insurance wise are going to cost. The other piece is maternity and paternity leave. So do you have a maternity leave? Is it paid? If it's not, this is a really good time to start saving for when you're not going to be getting paid. So building up a really good emergency fund and a fund that's going to pay you while you're not working, if it's not something that's included. Just making plans for that is really, really important. In your emergency fund, right? Having a good hefty emergency fund, because I think we all know that kiddos can be pretty expensive. So save, save, save. Talk to your health insurance, find out what the cost is going to be. If this is your first child, you're going on to a family plan. Those can be kind of expensive, so you want to make sure that you're prepared for that. And then after kiddo comes, again, revisiting beneficiaries is really, really important. But congratulations. And then when you're ready, I can talk to you about education planning. That's a whole nother expense that's exciting. Janet, do you want to share anything for expecting mama?
Expecting mamas, yeah. I guess it's really important. I see this in hindsight from my own situation, having kids a long time ago. But are you going to be an at-home mom? Do you have it set up where are you working now? Are you going to be two wage earners? Do you need to continue to be? Do you need to go back to work? Because there's a lot, if that's the case, like Rachel says, there's money involved in that for you to be aware of before the situation comes where the baby is born and you have to go back to work. Think about this ahead of time, gather your information ahead of time, because there's also a psychological part to this when if you do have to go back to work, leaving the baby, and preparing yourself as much in advance for that as possible. Something as simple as parenting styles, talk about that with your spouse, people don't really talk about this before they have children, but what's your style? What do you think it is? There's plenty of information out there now, the different types of styles. You may find that you're, more authoritarian and your spouse is permissive. So it's like, that's going to be a situation there. So talk about that ahead of time, and your relationship will change as your marital relationship will change. That's just inevitable. So try to, I'd say ahead of time, make sure your communication is clear. I know this is, there's going to be so many uncertainties when this is just unfolding and you don't know what's going to happen, but you can try to be as strong in your communication with each other as you possibly can before the baby comes, because everything kind of spirals a little bit out of control after that. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Isn't that the truth? Spirals a little bit out of control.
A little bit.
Ellen, anything you want to add?
Yeah, of course, when you're contemplating starting the family, it's a good time to, while you're thinking about all these parenting styles and what's going to look like, is to just start talking about, well, if something were to happen, to both of you, who would you want raising that child? What types of care do you want to be provided to that child? Do you want the standard health, education, maintenance, and support? Or do you want to add, a provision that if the guardians need to buy a bigger car, that they can use trust funds for that? Or if you have a child who's got a really good business idea, that they can have, a bigger distribution to start a business or to put a down payment on a house. It's kind of talk through some of those and think through it. The timing on it is best right after you've recovered from, your child is born, because then a little bit more, we can include the name and the birth date, and then, that's a good time to nail down all the details of it. And then just know as well that the will or the trust can include other future born children. So you don't have to wait until you've got, as many kids as are going to be there. They don't all have to be named in the document. We can still have it set up to take care of all your kids. So that's just one thing to keep in mind as far as timing. Back to Rachel.
Rachel, I have another question. Why not use a family member for your advance directive?
I'll mute myself again. So you can name family members on your advance directive. That is completely up to you. The bottom line is, who do you trust talking to your doctor, managing your care? It can be, a spouse, it can be family members, it can be a friend, it can be whoever's willing to serve in that role. There's professional fiduciaries if maybe you live here and there's no family nearby. Whoever's named in that document, they don't have to be local, but it's helpful. they can be out of state, but it's, again, just logistically wise. This is the person that it can be helpful if they can be in the room in person to see your condition, to talk to your doctor, to drive you to and from appointments if need be, to make sure that your home is appropriate if there's any, support systems or healthcare needs to keep you in your home, that sort of thing. So it can be helpful to have someone local, but it really just boils down to who do you trust, and then have those conversations. Who are you comfortable talking to about end of life decisions? Tell them what quality of life means to you. Tell them, all these details so that they have more guidance as far as what you would want them to do. And then make sure that you name more than one person, please, because if that first choice is not available, make sure that there's a backup, and you can name, even 3 or 4 other names, just to make sure that if someone is out of commissions, they just had a baby, or is on safari, or is not available, you've always got somebody who is.
I do have another question. What would advantage be of trust if children are grown and assets have a title, like house, car, and 401k, bank accounts, etc., have owners?
So if I understand the question correctly, is, if your children are grown and everything that you own has title to it, is there a point to trust? Like, why would I need a trust? Couple things to think about. So on a lot of accounts, you've got beneficiary designations. So if you've got, we'll take the house out of consideration for right now, but say, for example, you've got investment accounts and a retirement account, and you pay on death to my kids. That can work really well. That's one way that you stay out of a probate administration. But a few things that are a little bit of a drawback with beneficiary designations is, well, what happens if your child passes away before you? Do they have kids? Are their kids minors? Is there a custodian that's set up, or is that going to trigger a conservatorship? Does the document with whatever financial institution say that if one child's deceased, then the other child receives 100% and it'll essentially disinherit the grandkids? What happens in that instance? And then, of course, if there's if your kids communicate really well and if they can work together, then beneficiary designations can work well, except if you've got an outstanding debt or if you've got outstanding taxes, then it gets a little bit trickier as far as, well, how do we get all the kids on board with paying their fair share? And if whatever creditor or debtor finds out that there was an inheritance, they can come after one beneficiary for the whole amount. They don't have to portion it between all of them, up to the amount that they inherit. They can't come after your personal funds or any of that. So beneficiary designations can be a good tool. It can be one of those kind of middle step to avoid a probate, but they can come with a whole host of problems just because you can't build in all the contingencies that you can with a trust. So I always prefer to set up a trust, because then we've got it very spelled out. Who gets what, and if they're deceased before you, there's a minor's trust if the kids are under a certain age or over a certain age. And of course, we pool all the funds and pay the final debts and pay the final taxes and then distribute. So it's just streamlined to make sure everything is buttoned up and there's no loose ends that can crop up over time. So I hope that answered your question.
Answered my question.
Oh.
That wasn't my question, but I'm like, something new. Thanks, Ellen.
Yeah.
Do we have any other
I don't
questions?
have, nope, no more questions have come through, but everybody is unmuted. So if anybody wants to ask a last minute question, feel free.
And if you aren't sure how to unmute yourself, it's just the little red mic button next to your name. If you would like to ask a question. Otherwise, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Janet and Ellen. This has been wonderful. If anyone on the call knows someone who might find this information helpful or has questions that they want to ask, we're going to be hosting this same webinar tomorrow night at 5 o'clock. The invite is on our website. After you leave today, you're going to get a survey. In the survey, it just asks, are there other topics that you want to hear about? Are you interested in an initial complimentary consultation with Janet or myself? And that's a time that we can talk about a few questions about your budget or your personal situation, same with Janet. And we're also going to send a follow-up email that has Ellen's information and Janet's information so that you can reach out directly if you guys have any questions. Ladies, is there anything that I missed? Anything you want to mention before we let everyone go?
No. Thank you,
This has
Rachel.
been fun. Yeah, this was really fun.
Thank you all for being here.
Yeah, thanks for being here, everyone, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.